The moment I realized my parents had betrayed me is seared into my memory. It was at my sister Megan's engagement party, held at my parents' sprawling colonial home in Connecticut. The evening had that particular golden quality, you know. String lights twinkled in the oak trees, champagne flowed freely, and the soft hum of conversation and laughter filled the air. I remember standing on the edge of the patio, watching everyone celebrate, feeling like I was observing the scene through glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have been happy. My sister was marrying a decent guy. My parents were beaming with pride. And I had just landed a promotion at the architectural firm where I'd been working myself to the bone for 3 years. But there was this heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake, a shadow I'd been carrying ever since my grandfather Richard passed away 6 months earlier. My grandfather was my anchor in a family where I often felt like I was drifting. He was the one who taught me to fish, who listened to my dreams of designing sustainable buildings when I was just 10 years old, who slipped me books on architecture and whispered, "Build something that will outlast us all. Live." While my parents fawned over Megan's pageant victories and cheerleading trophies, Grandpa Richard was in the garage with me, helping me construct model buildings out of whatever we could find. "You've got the vision, kid," he'd say, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Some people can only see what is, but you can see what could be. I was adjusting my dress, a simple navy number that had cost me more than I'd like to admit, when my mother Caroline approached, champagne flute in hand. Her smile was wide but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Darling, you're not mingling? Come, join the celebration." She looped her arm through mine, pulling me toward the crowd. "The Hendersons just arrived, and they're dying to hear about your little apartment renovations." Little apartment renovations. That's how she referred to my work redesigning sustainable living spaces for a major client. I bit back a retort and let her guide me through the party. We were passing the buffet table when I overheard my father, William's booming voice, coming from a circle of his golf buddies. "The best wedding planner in New England. Nothing but the best for my princess. The venue alone is costing us a small fortune, but what else is a father for?" I slowed, my mother tugging at my arm. "And thank God for Richard's place up in Vermont," he continued, unaware I was now within earshot. "Selling it is covering almost half the wedding costs." Perfect timing, really. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. My grandfather's Vermont cabin, the one he'd spent 20 years restoring with his own hands, the one where I'd spent every summer helping him, learning how to sand floors and replace roof tiles, the one he had promised would be mine someday. "What did Dad just say?" I asked, my voice barely audible. My mother's grip on my arm tightened. "Oh, don't worry about that now, Olivia. Let's go say hello to the Wilsons." I pulled away from her, something cold and hard forming in my chest. "Mom, what is Dad talking about? Grandpa's cabin? Selling it?" Her smile faltered, just for a second, before returning with renewed brightness. "Well, yes, darling. Your father and I decided it made the most sense. Megan's wedding is going to be spectacular, and these things don't come cheap. The cabin was just sitting there empty, and you know how your grandfather would have wanted to help Megan have her perfect day." "That cabin was supposed to be mine," I said, my voice rising. "Just enough that a few nearby guests glanced our way. Grandpa promised it to me. He said it was in his will." My mother's eyes darted around nervously before she pulled me toward the kitchen, away from curious ears. Once we were alone, her pleasant facade dropped like a heavy curtain. "Don't make a scene, Olivia. Not today of all days." Her voice had that razor-sharp quality it got when she was really angry. "Yes, your grandfather mentioned leaving you the cabin. But when we reviewed the will with our lawyer, it was clear that the property was left to your father and me to distribute as we saw fit. And we saw fit to use it for Megan's wedding. She deserves the absolute best, and I don't." The words escaped before I could stop them, carrying the weight of years of feeling second best. My mother sighed, that familiar look of disappointment clouding her features. "This isn't about you, Olivia. This is about your sister's special day. Why must you always make everything so difficult?" Why can't you just be happy for Megan like a normal sister would be? Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and there stood Megan, radiant in her cream cocktail dress, diamond engagement ring catching the light. "There you are," she exclaimed, her voice slightly slurred. "From Champagne? Mom, Aunt Linda is looking for you. Something about the caterer for the engagement brunch?" My mother's smile returned instantly. "Of course, sweetie. I'll be right there." She shot me a warning look before bustling out of the kitchen. Megan lingered, fiddling with her ring. We'd never been close, Megan and I, for years apart. We were like planets in different orbits. She was the golden child, the beauty queen, with the perfect grades and the perfect friends. I was the odd one out, too serious, too focused on my little projects, as my mother called them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. The story, so she said, leaning against the counter. "You found out about the cabin, you knew?" I asked, though I wasn't really surprised. She shrugged, examining her manicure. "Mom and Dad told me a few weeks ago," I said. "Grandpa left them in charge of his estate, and they decided the cabin would be better used to fund my wedding than sitting up there collecting dust. It's not like you have time to use it anyway, with how much you work." The casual dismissal of something that meant the world to me felt like a slap. "That cabin was the only place I ever felt like I belonged in this family, Megan," Grandpa promised. To me, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at having to deal with my emotions on her special night. "Look, Liv, I'm sorry if you're upset, but Mom and Dad made their decision. And honestly, this wedding is really important to me. Jason's family is like super connected. His dad is a state senator, for God's sake. Everything has to be perfect. So your perfect wedding is worth more than my inheritance?" "Then what Grandpa wanted?" She sighed dramatically. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a dusty old cabin. You can come visit us in the Hamptons any time once we're married. Jason's family has a gorgeous summer house." I looked at my sister then, really looked at her, and felt a wave of pity wash over me. She had no idea what that dusty old cabin represented, not just to me, but to our grandfather. It wasn't about the property value. It was about the legacy, the memories, the promise. "Congratulations on your engagement, Megan," I said quietly. "I hope it's everything you dreamed of." I walked out of the kitchen, through the crowd of well-wishers, past my beaming father and his golf buddies, past my mother charming the room as always. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked at the far end of the driveway. As I sat behind the wheel, not yet turning the key, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been avoiding for weeks. "Henderson and Associates. How may I direct?" "Your call?" came the crisp, professional voice. "James Henderson, please," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tell him it's Olivia Mitchell calling about my grandfather Richard Mitchell's will." The moment that call connected, my life changed forever. I just didn't know it yet. James Henderson had been my grandfather's attorney for over 30 years. He was a soft-spoken man with keen eyes and a methodical mind. When I arrived at his office the following Monday, he greeted me with genuine warmth. "Olivia, I've been hoping you'd call. I tried reaching out several times after the reading of the will, but your parents assured me they would discuss everything with you." He gestured for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "That's why I'm here, Mr. Henderson. It seems there's been some confusion regarding my grandfather's cabin in Vermont." Henderson's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Confusion? I'm not sure I understand." "Your grandfather's intentions regarding the property were quite clear." I took a deep breath. "My parents are selling the cabin to pay for my sister's wedding. They told me that Grandpa left his estate to them to distribute as they saw fit." Henderson leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "I see. Did your parents show you the will itself?" "No," I admitted. "They just told me what they claimed it said." He nodded slowly, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I think it's time you read your grandfather's will for yourself, Olivia." As he handed me the document, my hands trembled slightly. I'd avoided this moment. Avoided the finality of seeing my grandfather's last wishes spelled out in cold legal language. But now as I began to read, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The first few pages were standard legal text, but then I reached a section labeled Specific Bequests. To my granddaughter, Olivia Mitchell, I leave my cabin and property in Stowe, Vermont, including all furnishings and contents therein. Olivia has been my companion in restoring this property, and I know she will continue to cherish it as I have. I looked up at Henderson, confusion and hope warring within me. This says he left me the cabin directly, not to my parents. Henderson nodded. That's correct. The cabin was never part of the general estate left to your parents. It was a specific bequest to you and you alone. But then how? How could they be selling it? Henderson's expression was grave. They shouldn't be. Legally, they can't. That property belongs to you, Olivia. It was transferred to your name upon the probate of the will 3 months ago. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 3 months ago? But I never signed anything. I never knew. Your father signed on your behalf, claiming he had your power of attorney. He said you were too distraught over your grandfather's passing to handle the details yourself. A cold fury began to build inside me. My father had lied. He had falsely claimed authority he didn't have, and he had stolen what was rightfully mine. There's more, Henderson said, turning the page for me. Your grandfather added a codicil to his will 6 months before he passed. It contains some specific instructions regarding the Vermont property. I scanned the page, and my breath caught. The Vermont property shall not be sold or transferred out of Olivia's possession for a minimum of 10 years following my death, should Olivia choose to sell the property before this 10-year period has elapsed. All proceeds from such a sale shall be donated in full to the Green Mountain Conservation Fund, an organization dedicated to preserving Vermont's natural beauty. The fine print, I whispered, understanding dawning. Henderson smiled for the first time since our conversation began. Your grandfather knew your parents quite well, Olivia. He anticipated they might try to pressure you into selling. This clause ensures that even if they succeeded, they wouldn't benefit financially. I sat back, a wild, inappropriate urge to laugh bubbling up inside me. My grandfather, even from beyond the grave, was looking out for me. He had built-in protection I hadn't even known I needed. Mr. Henderson, I said, my mind racing, my parents are in the process of selling the cabin right now. They've already accepted an offer, according to my sister. Henderson's smile faded. Then we need to act immediately. I'll prepare a cease and desist letter today. As the rightful owner, you can stop the sale. But Olivia, he hesitated, this will likely create significant conflict with your family. Are you prepared for that? Was I prepared to fight my family? To stand up to thee? Parents who had always made me feel like an afterthought, to potentially ruin the lavish wedding my sister had been dreaming of. I thought about my grandfather, about the hours we'd spent restoring that cabin, about his hands guiding mine as we sanded the ancient oak floors. I thought about the promises we'd made to each other, about the legacy he wanted to leave me. Yes, I said, my voice firm, unprepared. Little did I know just how ugly things would get, or how that overlooked fine print would change everything. I spent the drive home from Henderson's office in a state of shocked disbelief. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, to have my best interests at heart, had deliberately deceived me. They had attempted to steal my inheritance and would have succeeded if I hadn't made that call. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the pain was something else: resolve. For the first time in my life, I was going to stand up to William and Caroline Mitchell, and I wasn't going to back down. I pulled into the driveway of my small apartment building, a converted textile mill from the 1920s that I'd fallen in love with, for its high ceilings and original brick walls. It wasn't fancy like my parents' house, but it was mine, paid for with my own hard work. As I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Your mother, and I need to discuss something important with you. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. Don't be late. Now, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. They must have found out about my visit to Henderson's office. Good. Let them sweat for a change. I unlocked my apartment door, immediately greeted by my cat, Edison, named after the architect I'd admired since I was a child. I dropped my keys on the counter and sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. What would you do, Edison? I asked, scratching him behind the ears. "Take the high road. Try to understand their perspective." Edison purred, offering no advice. I knew what my grandfather would say. He'd tell me to stand my ground, to fight for what was rightfully mine, but to do it with dignity. "Never lower yourself to their level. Live," he'd say. "That's how you know you've lost." Oh. The next evening I arrived at my parents' house precisely at 7 p.m. I had dressed carefully, a tailored blazer over a simple blouse, dark jeans, minimal, jewelry, professional, serious, not the little girl they could push around anymore. My mother answered the door, her smile tight. "Olivia, right on time. Your father's in the dining room." No hug, no kiss on the cheek. We were beyond pleasantries now. The tension in the dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father sat at the head of the table, a tumbler of scotch in front of him, his face flushed with what I recognized as the early signs of anger. "Sit down, Olivia," he said, not bothering with a greeting. I took a seat across from my mother, folding my hands in front of me. "I assume this is about Grandpa's cabin." My father's eyes narrowed. "You went behind our backs to James Henderson?" "And you went behind mine to steal my inheritance," I countered, keeping my voice level. "Seems we're both full of surprises." "Dude, we did not steal anything," my mother interjected, her voice sharp. "Your grandfather left us in charge of his estate." "No, he didn't," I said, pulling a folded copy of the will from my bag and sliding it across the table. "He left you the house in Massachusetts, in the stock portfolio. He left the cabin to me, directly. It was never yours to sell. My father didn't touch the document. You're acting in the family's best interest. Megan's wedding is not my responsibility to fund," I finished for him. "And according to the codicil in Grandpa's will, if the cabin is sold within 10 years of his death, all proceeds go to conservation. So even if you had the right to sell it, which you don't, you wouldn't see a penny of that money." The color drained from my mother's face. "What are you talking about? What codicil?" "Ah, the fine print," I said, allowing myself a small, grim smile. "Grandpa knew you too well. He knew you might try something like this, so he made sure to protect me." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "This is ridiculous. We have a buyer ready to close next week. The deposit is non-refundable. McGann's wedding venue has been booked. Then I suggest you find another way to pay for it," I said calmly. "Henderson is sending a cease and desist letter to the real estate agent and the buyers tomorrow morning. The sale is not going through." My mother's eyes filled with tears, whether genuine or another manipulation tactic. I couldn't tell anymore. "Olivia, please, be reasonable. This wedding means everything to Megan. It's her future. And the cabin is mine," I replied, unmoved. "My future. Oh, the one thing in this family that was meant for me, not Megan." "Is that what this is about?" My father's voice rose. "Jealousy? For God's sake, Olivia, grow up. Megan is marrying into the Sullivan family. Do you have any idea what that connection could mean for all of us?" And there it was, the truth laid bare. This wasn't about giving Megan her dream wedding. This was about my parents' social climbing, their desperate desire to be connected to a political family, to elevate their own status. "This isn't about jealousy," I said, standing up. "This is about right and wrong. This is about honoring Grandpa's wishes. The cabin stays with me." My father stood as well, his face contorted with rage. "If you do this, if you ruin your sister's wedding, you are no longer welcome in this family. Do you understand me? You will be cut off completely." I looked at him, this man who had always been more concerned with appearances than with his daughter's happiness, and felt a strange sense of calm. "You can't cut me off from what you never gave me in the first place." My mother gasped. "Olivia, apologize to your father this instant." But I was done apologizing. I was done shrinking myself to fit into the box they had created for me. "I'm leaving. Now, please don't try to sell anything else that belongs to me." As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. "You'll regret this, Olivia. When you're alone with nothing but that run-down cabin, you'll wish you'd been a better daughter, a better sister." I turned back one last time. "No, Dad, I'll be wishing I'd stood up to you sooner." I walked out into the cool evening air, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. I had just burned a bridge that had been crumbling for most of my life, and I couldn't bring myself to regret it. What I didn't know then was that my parents wouldn't give up so easily. They had spent a lifetime getting their way, and they weren't about to let their disappointing daughter change that now. The battle for my grandfather's legacy was just beginning, and it would test me in ways I never imagined. But as I drove away from the house I'd grown up in, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror, I made a promise to myself and to my grandfather's memory. I would not back down. Not this time. Not ever again. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. 3 from my father, all variations on the theme of my ingratitude and selfishness. 8 from my mother, starting with guilt trips and escalating to threats. The rest were from Megan, who had apparently been informed of the situation and was not taking it well. I scrolled through her messages, each one more hysterical than the last. How could you do this to me? You're ruining the most important day of my life. Everyone's already RSVP'd, as the venue is paid for. Jason's family will think we're a joke. The last one gave me pause. If you ever cared about me at all, you'll call me back right now. Despite everything, she was still my sister. I'd changed her diapers, helped her with homework, cheered at her graduation. I couldn't just ignore her pain, even if it was wrapped in self-absorption. I hit call. Finally, she answered on the first ring. Do you have any idea what you've done? Good morning to you too, Megan, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Don't you dare be condescending right now, Olivia. Mom and Dad told me everything. How could you go behind everyone's backs like this? We had a plan. No, Megan, you. Mom and Dad had a plan. One that involved stealing my inheritance and lying to me about it. I was never consulted. It's just a stupid cabin. She exploded. A dusty old place in the middle of nowhere that you visit, what, twice a year? And now, because of your selfishness, my entire wedding is in jeopardy. Reminding myself that Megan was upset and lashing out. I'm sorry your wedding plans are affected, Megan, truly. But that cabin means a lot to me, and it was left to me specifically by Grandpa. It wasn't Mom and Dad's to sell, so what am I supposed to do now? She demanded. Now the Sullivans are expecting a certain kind of wedding. Do you know how humiliating it would be to downgrade everything at this point? Maybe consider a wedding. You can actually afford? I suggested, immediately regretting my tone. Oh, that's rich coming from you, she snapped, little Miss Independent who never needed anyone's help. You know what? You've always been jealous of me. Always. And now. You're using this inheritance thing to ruin the one day that's supposed to be about me. The accusation stung, but it also crystallized something for me. In Megan's world and my parents' world, everything revolved around appearances, around status, around what other people thought. My grandfather had been different. It valued substance over style, integrity over impression. And he had seen that same quality in me. Megan, this isn't about you, I said quietly. This is about honoring Grandpa's wishes. It's about respecting what he wanted. If Grandpa were here, he'd want me to have a beautiful wedding, she insisted. If Grandpa were here, he'd tell you that a marriage is more important than a wedding, I countered. And he'd be appalled that Mom and Dad tried to steal something he specifically left to me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Megan finally spoke again, her voice was cold. You know what? Keep your precious cabin. I hope you're happy up there all alone while the rest of us are living our lives. But don't expect an invitation to the wedding wherever it ends up being. The line went dead. I set my phone down and looked around my small apartment, suddenly feeling the weight of what I'd done. I had stood up for myself, yes, but at what cost? My family was fracturing before my eyes, and despite knowing I was in the right, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Edison jumped onto the counter, purring loudly and butting his head against my hand. At least you're on my side, I murmured, scratching him under the chin. My phone buzzed with a text from Henderson. Cease and desist delivered to real estate. Agent and buyers. Call me when you can. It was done. I had taken the first step in reclaiming what was rightfully mine. There was no turning back now. Little did I know that my parents had their own countermove. Plan one that would drag my grandfather's name through the mud and force me to decide just how far I was willing to go to defend his legacy. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare. My parents weren't going to give up their plans without a fight, and they had decades of experience in manipulating situations to their advantage. First came the flying monkeys' family, friends, and distant relatives suddenly calling to check in on me, their conversations inevitably steering toward how difficult this must be for poor Megan. How stressed my parents were, how a cabin wasn't worth tearing a family apart. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, was particularly relentless. "Livy, honey," she said, her southern accent thickening, as it always did when she was trying to be persuasive. "I'm just saying maybe there's a compromise here. Oh, what if you let them sell the cabin but they pay you back over time? Or what if you kept a small portion of the land but sold the rest?" "There's no compromise to be made, Aunt Susan," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The cabin is mine. Grandpa left it to me for a reason, but family is everything, Olivia," she insisted. "When you're my age, you'll realize that holding on to material things isn't worth losing the people who love you." I almost laughed at that. "Is that what my mother told you to say? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like they're the ones choosing a lavish wedding over a relationship with their daughter." The silence on the other end of the line told me I'd hit the mark. My aunt wasn't calling out of concern. She was my mother's proxy, sent to soften me up. Next came the workplace sabotage. My father had connections at several architectural firms in the area, including mine. Suddenly, I found myself removed from the sustainable housing project I'd been leading for 6 months. Reassigned to drafting bathroom layouts for a strip mall development. "It's nothing personal," my supervisor Alan explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "We just need your expertise on this new project." "My expertise is in sustainable design, not commercial bathrooms," I countered, knowing full well what was happening. Alan shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Olivia, I got a call from Doug Patterson. He mentioned there might be some personal issues affecting your work right now. Said it might be better to give you something less demanding for a while." Doug Patterson, my father's golf buddy and a major investor in our firm. I should have seen it coming. "My personal life isn't affecting my work," I said firmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd make decisions based on my performance, not on gossip from my father's friends." Alan had the decency to look embarrassed. "Just work on the strip mall for now, okay? We'll revisit the sustainable project in a few weeks." I walked out of his office seething. My father was trying to destabilize my career, to make me vulnerable, to remind me of his reach. It was a power play, pure and simple. But the real blow came from an unexpected source. My best friend from college, Zoe. We'd been roommates for 3 years, had seen each other through breakups and breakthroughs, had sworn to always have each other's backs. If there was one person outside my grandfather who truly knew me, it was Zoe. We met for coffee at our usual spot, a quirky, independent cafe halfway between our apartments. I'd barely taken my first sip when she dropped the bomb. Ran into your mom yesterday, she said, stirring her latte absently. "At that boutique on Elm Street?" She was looking at mother-of-a-bride dresses, and I prompted, a sense of unease creeping over me. "And she seemed really upset, Liv. She was crying in the dressing room, so the saleswoman had to bring her tissues." I set my cup down. "Zoe, my mother cries on command. She once made herself tear up to get out of a parking ticket." Zoe frowned. "I know, but this seemed real." She told me about the whole situation with the cabin and Megan's wedding. She hesitated. "Liv, is it possible you're being a little rigid about this? I mean, it's a cabin. Megan only gets one wedding day." Stared at her, disbelief washing. "Over me? Are you serious right now? My parents lied to me? They tried to sell property that legally belongs to me, without my knowledge or consent. They forged my signature, Zoe. And you think I'm being rigid?" I had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I just think family is complicated, you know. Sometimes you have to bend a little to keep the peace." "Bend," I repeated. "They want me to break. To give up something that matters deeply to me so Megan can have ice sculptures and a designer dress. It's not compromise, that's surrender." "Okay, but," she started. "But what?" I interrupted, a terrible thought suddenly occurring. To me? Wait, did my mother ask you to talk to me about this? Zoe's eyes flickered away, just for a second, but it was enough. She did, didn't she? I pressed. What did she offer you, Zoe? An invitation to the wedding? Chance to network with the Sullivans? That's not fair, she protested, but her flush told me I was close to the mark. She just asked me to help you see reason. She said you've always valued my opinion. I valued your honesty more, I said quietly, gathering my things. Goodbye, Zoe. I left her sitting there. Another bridge burned in what was becoming a systematic isolation. My parents were cutting off my support systems one by one, surrounding me with people who would echo their narrative. Olivia the difficult one. Olivia the selfish one. Olivia who wouldn't bend. That night alone in my apartment, I hit my lowest point. Edison curled in my lap as I scrolled through old photos on my phone, family holidays, birthdays, graduations. Images of a family that, whatever its flaws, had been mine. Was I really willing to lose all of this over a cabin in Vermont? For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe the path of least resistance signing over the cabin, making peace with my family, was the wiser choice. Then my eye caught the framed photo on my bookshelf. Me and Grandpa Richard on the porch of the cabin, both of us covered in sawdust, grinning like fools after a day of replacing floorboards. I was 16 in that picture, gangly and earnest, and he had his arm around me, pride radiating from his weathered face. I picked up the frame, running my finger over his image. "What would you do, Grandpa?" I whispered, and in that moment, I could almost hear his voice, gruff and certain. "Stand your ground. Live. Some things are worth fighting for." The cabin wasn't just wood and land. It was every summer spent learning at my grandfather's side. It was the one place in the world where I had felt fully seen and accepted for exactly who I was. It was the legacy he had chosen specifically for me, not for my parents, not for Megan, but for me. I set the photo down and reached for my laptop. It was time to go on the offensive. First, I emailed Henderson, asking him to send me all documentation related to the cabin, the deed, the tax records, any communication with my parents. I needed to understand exactly what they had done and how. Next, I called my colleague Marcus, who had a sister working at the local newspaper. If my parents wanted to play dirty, two could play that game. I wasn't above a little strategic information sharing if it came to that. Finally, I booked a flight to Vermont for the weekend. I needed to see the cabin to remind myself what I was fighting for. As I confirmed the reservation, a new email pinged into my inbox. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made my heart race. Richard Mitchell's property dispute. I opened it to find a message from someone named Thomas Walsh, claiming to be the intended buyer of the cabin. He expressed confusion about the cease and desist letter and asked if we could speak directly, suggesting that perhaps we could come to an arrangement that would satisfy all parties. My first instinct was to delete it. This could easily be another of my parents' tactics. But something made me pause. What if this Walsh person had information that could help me? What if my parents had told him something they hadn't told me? I replied with caution, agreeing to a phone call the following day, but making it clear that the sale would not be proceeding under any circumstances. His response came within minutes. "I understand. I just want to clear up some confusion. Your parents gave me the impression that the sale was being handled through a family trust. If that's not the case, I'd like to know exactly what I've walked into." Family trust? What family trust? This was the first I'd heard of any such arrangement. I forwarded the email to Henderson with a single question. Did my grandfather ever establish a family trust? Henderson's response was swift and unequivocal. No family trust exists for the Mitchell estate. Your grandfather was explicit about keeping the cabin separate from the rest of his assets. This sounds like another fabrication. Cold anger settling over me. My parents weren't just bending the truth. They were creating elaborate fictions to support their narrative. How far would they go to get what they wanted? The next morning, I called Thomas Walsh from my office, closing the door for privacy. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for speaking with me," he began, his voice warm and professional. "I want to be transparent with you. I'm a developer looking to create a small luxury retreat in the Stowe area. Your parents' property is ideal for my purposes. Remote enough for privacy, but accessible enough for amenities." "It's not my parents' property," I corrected him. The cabin belongs to me. It was left to me directly in my grandfather's will. There was a pause on the other end. That's not what I was told. Your father presented himself as the executor of a family trust that held the property. He showed me documents with what appeared to be your signature, authorizing the sale. My blood ran cold. Mr. Walsh, my signature was forged. There is no family trust. My grandfather left the cabin to me specifically, with a codicil preventing its sale for 10 years unless the proceeds go entirely to charity. I see. His tone had shifted, becoming more cautious. Ms. Mitchell, I don't want to get involved in a family dispute, but I'm troubled by what you're telling me. If what you say is true, your father presented falsified documents to me and my attorney. I believe that's exactly what happened, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the shock. And I'd be very interested in seeing copies of those documents, if you're willing to share them. Walsh agreed to email me the paperwork by the end of the day. As soon as we hung up, I called Henderson again, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. They forged my signature on trust documents, I told him without preamble. Walsh is sending me copies today. This goes beyond just trying. To sell the cabin, this is fraud. Henderson's voice was grave. Olivia, if they've created fraudulent legal documents, this has moved into criminal territory. Are you prepared for what that might mean? Was I prepared to potentially see my own parents face legal consequences? To be the one who initiated those consequences? The thought made me physically ill, but the alternative, allowing them to steal from me, to forge my name, to erase my grandfather's wishes, was worse. I'm prepared, I said finally. Whatever it takes to protect what's rightfully mine. Then forward me those documents as soon as you receive them, Henderson instructed. And Olivia, be careful. People who are willing to commit fraud rarely stop at just one line they won't cross. His warning proved prophetic. That evening, as I was packing for my trip to Vermont, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Is this Olivia Mitchell? Asked a gruff male voice when I answered. Yes, who's calling? This is Detective Ramirez with the County Sheriff's Department. We've received a report about suspicious activity at a property registered in your name. In Stowe, Vermont. Neighbors reported lights and movement inside the cabin. Do you have anyone staying there currently? My stomach dropped. No, Detective. The cabin should be empty. Actually flying up tomorrow to check on it. I'd advise you to delay that trip, he said. We're treating this as a potential burglary. The property will be off limits until we complete our investigation. How long will that take? I asked, panic rising. I need to make sure nothing was damaged or stolen. Hard to say. These things can take time. We'll be in touch when the property is cleared. After he hung up, I sat on my bed, my half-packed suitcase beside me, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Was there really a break-in at the cabin? Or was this another delay tactic, another attempt to keep me away from what was mine? I dialed the Stowe Sheriff's Department directly, bypassing the number that had called me. Hello, I'm calling about a reported break-in at my property, I explained to the dispatcher. I spoke with the Detective Ramirez earlier. Detective Ramirez? The dispatcher repeated. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name on our force. A chill ran down my spine. Someone called me claiming to be Detective Ramirez from your department. He said there was suspicious activity at my cabin on Ridgeline Road. Ma'am, we haven't had any reports from Ridgeline Road today. We definitely don't have a Detective Ramirez. Would you like to file a police report about this call? I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. The call had been fake, another attempt to keep me away from the cabin. But why? What were my parents trying to hide? Changed my flight too. The earliest available, the next morning. Whatever was happening at the cabin, I needed to see it for myself. The flight to Burlington was turbulent, matching my state of mind. I rented a car at the airport and drove the familiar route to Stowe. The Green Mountains rising around me like ancient guardians. Despite everything, I felt a sense of homecoming as I navigated the winding roads leading to Ridgeline. The cabin came into view as I rounded the final bend, a sturdy two-story structure of weathered cedar and stone, nestled among towering pines. My grandfather had built it himself in the 1970s, adding to it over the years as his skills and resources grew. But as I pulled into the gravel driveway, I noticed something that made my heart sink. A sleek black SUV parked near the front door. Someone was here. I approached cautiously, wishing I had thought to call the real sheriff before coming up alone. The front door was closed but unlocked. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. "Hello?" I called, stepping into the familiar great room with its soaring ceiling and massive stone fireplace. In here came a voice from the Kachina, voice I recognized immediately. My father sat at the old oak table, a spread of papers before him, a glass of what looked like Grandpa's special reserve bourbon at his elbow. He didn't look surprised to see me. "I figured you'd show up sooner or later," he said, taking a sip of his drink, "though I thought our little detective ruse might buy us another day or two." "So it was you," I said, anger flaring. "You impersonated a police officer to keep me away from my own property. You've any idea how illegal that is?" He waved a dismissive hand. "A harmless misdirection, that's all. We needed time." "Time for what?" I demanded, glancing at the papers on the table. "To forge more documents? To sell off pieces of the cabin before I could stop you?" "Time to find this," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "Your grandfather's original will. The one he made before he lost his mind." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? Grandpa didn't lose his mind. He was sharp as a tack until the day he died." My father's face hardened. "That's what you want to believe. The truth is, Richard started slipping about a year before he passed. Small things at first, forgetting appointments, repeating stories, then bigger things. The codicil about not selling the property, the specific bequest to you, that was written during a period when he wasn't himself." I picked up the folder. With trembling hands, inside was indeed a will, dated 3 years before my grandfather's death, leaving his entire estate to my parents to distribute as they saw fit. It looked authentic, with my grandfather's distinctive signature at the bottom. "This is the real will," my father insisted. "The one Henderson has, the one with that ridiculous codicil, was written when your grandfather was being manipulated." "Manipulated?" I repeated. "By who?" "By you, Olivia," he said, his voice cold. "All those weekends you spent up here with him, filling his head with your ideas, taking advantage of his affection for you. You saw an opportunity, and you took it." The accusation was so outrageous, so completely backward, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. When I finally found my voice, it shook with fury. "That is the most twisted, delusional thing I have ever heard," I said. "Grandpa wasn't manipulated or confused. He knew exactly what he was doing when he left me this cabin. He knew you would try to take it from me, that you'd never respect his wishes unless he put legal safeguards in place." My father stood, his face flushing with anger. "You ungrateful little," he caught himself, visibly restraining his temper. "This isn't about the cabin anymore, Olivia. This is about your sister's future. The Sullivans are one of the most connected families in the IE. State, do you have any idea what this marriage could mean for all of us?" "All of us?" I laughed bitterly. "Mean all of you? When have you ever considered what I want or need? Gave you everything," he exploded. "Best schools, best opportunities, and what did you do with it? You chose a career designing tree houses or whatever the hell it is you do. Living in that industrial dump downtown, turning your back on everything we built for you." "Built nothing for me," I said quietly. "Everything I have, I earned myself, in this cabin. This is the one thing in my life that was given to me out of pure love, not obligation, or appearances, or social climbing." We stood facing each other across the kitchen table. Decades of resentment and misunderstanding crystallized in this moment. I saw my father clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the intimidating patriarch I'd grown up fearing, but as a deeply insecure man who measured his worth by his social standing, by the reflective glow of his golden child's achievements. "You can show that will to any judge you want," I told him. "But I have the codicil, notarized and witnessed. I have evidence that you forged my signature on sale documents. I have proof that you impersonated a police officer to keep me away from my property. How do you think that's going to play out in court?" Something flickered in his eyes in certainty, maybe even fear. He hadn't expected me to fight back so effectively, to have gathered evidence, to be standing my ground instead. A of crumbling under pressure as I always had before. "You would do that?" he asked. "You would drag our family name through the courts, humiliate your mother, ruin your sister's engagement? All for this pile of logs?" I looked around the cabin at the hand-hewn beams my grandfather had salvaged from an old barn, at the riverstone fireplace we had built together one summer, at the wide pine floors we had sanded side by side. This wasn't a pile of logs. This was my heritage, my sanctuary, the physical embodiment of the only unconditional love I'd ever known. "I would do it," I confirmed. "Not because I want to hurt any of you, but because I refuse to be hurt by you. Anymore, this ends now." He stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing a stranger. Then, without another word, he gathered his papers, drained his glass, and walked out of the cabin. I listened to the SUV's engine roar to life, the crunch of gravel as he drove away. Alone in the sudden silence, I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, physically and emotionally drained. The confrontation I'd been dreading for weeks was over. But the war wasn't won yet. My father wasn't a man who admitted defeat easily. If anything, I'd just made him more dangerous. I pulled out my phone to call Henderson and update him on this. Latest development, the supposedly original will, the fake detective, my father's presence at the cabin. As I waited for the call to connect, I noticed something odd about the folder my father had left behind. The tab had a small marking I hadn't noticed before, tiny RM, written in what looked like my grandfather's handwriting. Richard Mitchell's personal filing system. But that didn't make sense if this was a fake will my father had produced to support his claims. I examined the document more closely. The signature looked authentic, yes, but the more I studied the will itself, the more certain details jumped out at me, phrases my grandfather would never have used, provisions that contradicted values he had held his entire life. This wasn't a genuine document. From 3 years ago, this was a recent fabrication, carefully crafted to look legitimate. But my father had made one critical mistake. He had used one of my grandfather's actual folders to make the forgery seem more authentic. As Henderson's voice came on the line, I felt a renewed surge of determination. "Oh, James," I said, "I think I just caught my father in another lie. And this time, I have proof." What I didn't realize then was that this evidence would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of who my grandfather truly was and why he had been so determined to protect his legacy from the people who should have honored it most. The truth was bigger and more painful than I could have imagined. No, but it was time for it to come to light, no matter who got burned in the process. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.